Hello, 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 everybody. Well, the five people that are here. We're just gonna wait around 5 minutes for everyone to kind of join in. If you have any questions right now, or you have topics that you kind of want to go over, please ask them in the chat right now. Now would be the best time to ask me so that we can kind of go over and make this a smoother review session. So if you have any questions, please do ask. If not, just chill for around 5 minutes and then we'll get started at around 3:35. But it's good to see you all here, for those of you that are joining right now. If you could even say hi, just so I know who, just type in hi in the chat so I know who's here. That'd be even greater. Because I cannot particularly see who's actually watching. We got 7 people, still waiting for some more people to come in. I'm not sure what you mean by that, as in, I don't know your emails. I do know all your emails, your student emails. Hello, Yazdan. We got 8 people watching. Hi, Jinsu. Yasan asks, do you want to review? Are we going to review chapter 5? Yes, that is exactly what I will be reviewing today. To be honest, you guys should have actually started chapter 6. So we are playing catch up with the other class. So yes, we will be reviewing chapter 5, and I'll talk about how I'm going to be running my classes starting next week as well. Hello, Sylvia. We got 10 people watching. Just gonna wait around 2 more minutes for some more people, and then we'll get started. Just 1 more minute, and then we will get started with our review lesson. And of course, a couple of announcements before we begin. If you know of anyone who's not here that's a friend of yours, please send the link to them and have them join as soon as possible. Okay? Because I would like as many people to be here, especially because we'll be determining what time our classes are going to be. So that's pretty important. We got 13. We got climbing. We're climbing with viewers, which is good. Okay. It's 3:35, so let's get started. So welcome once again, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Hey, Matthew, good to have you join us. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's important for you to know that whoever is watching our review lesson today will be determining what time our class will be starting every day on Monday, starting on Monday next week. So it's good for you to be here. Let's actually start with that, and I'll post a poll link in the chat, so please take a look at that and vote on it as well. But overall, thank you once again so much for coming in. My live streams are essentially designed very similarly to how I'm going to be doing my lesson right now. So I'll start the stream around 10 to 15 minutes before the actual start time. You'll see a countdown. You can just leave it on and go do something. I'll have some music playing in the background. And then when you come back, I give around 5 minutes for people to start tuning in, loading the videos, loading the live stream, and then once that goes, after 5 minutes, I get started with the lesson. I jump right into it. And so most of the time, if there is a worksheet that you have to follow, I will post up the worksheets beforehand, just like Miss A has before. And then you will print that out or write it down on a piece of paper, and you'll follow along using that system, right? So you can take notes on the paper as I'm writing notes on the screen. If you ever have trouble with volume and you can't hear me, please let me know. I'll up my volume a little bit louder or lower it depending on what people say. But otherwise, that's my format. Classes can go from around 30 minutes to an hour depending on how long the lesson is and how difficult I find it, or however many questions are asked. And please interact with the chat. If you type something in chat, I should be able to read it within 3 seconds, as there's only a 3-second delay. So please type anything, ask me questions. Just don't type inappropriate things for obvious reasons, and I'll just block you from typing in chat. Will you help us after classes too? Yes, email me if you need to. So Monday and Tuesday will be our first set of classes. Wednesdays will always be tutorial. So if you have any questions that you wanted to ask me and you wanted me to help you in person live, Wednesday's class would be like you come in and it's just dedicated for questions. Thursday, Friday will be classes. Okay, so it's 4 days classes, 1 day of kind of tutorials, right? Learning and stuff like that, and question asking. That being said, let's jump right into it. So with our work here, so let's take a look at what we need to do today. Quadratic equations, you should already know some basic ideas. Okay, y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. This is your basic quadratic equation, right? Or when you're just given this right side, it's called the quadratic expression, right? And you learned various ways of converting this. So right now, this basic form, if we give this basic form here, is called standard form, right? We know this as standard form. So we know that. But you've also learned some different forms. Now, I'm not sure how Miss A and Miss Lifshitz wrote the factored form, but for factored form, okay, for factored form it should be y is equal to, and it depends on how the teacher writes it, but I've seen this very often as well, x minus x, x minus r, where r and s are any other numbers. So you've learned factored form, and we have a in the front here. And then our last one, we have a, and this is very different depending on the teacher or the textbook, or not D, usually it's H, but the idea here is this, and this was our vertex form. Right, so these are all forms, okay, that you've done for your different quadratic expressions. You've learned how to go from standard form to factored form from factoring, as the name implies. You've went from standard form to vertex form by completing the square. And you've also, of course, reversed it from vertex to standard and factored to standard by expanding the brackets. Okay. Now, of the two methods, what would you like me to go take up first? Would you like me to go over factoring, or would you like me to go over vertex form? What do you think you would prefer? No one? No one has any input? Okay. Let's talk about completing the square then. Okay. Let's start with that, and then we'll talk about factoring. Okay. Let's talk about completing the square, and then we'll talk about factoring. Okay. So completing the square was the idea of changing standard form into vertex form. So let's go over completing the square here. Now, of course, it could be any equation in standard form, right? So let's say we have something like 2x squared plus 12x plus 2 equals 0. Let's do something like this. Okay. So when you're given something like this and you're trying to get to vertex form to find out the vertex, some key things that you want to first do. First step, we factor out the a. When you're completing the square, you factor out the a. You don't factor it out from the last term here. So the first step is actually going to be just factoring out a from the first two terms. So I'm actually going to get 2 bracket x squared plus 6x plus 2. That's going to give us the accurate value for what a and b are. We're essentially forcing our a to be 1 inside here, and then the b to be 6. Okay? And the value that we're going to add and subtract, right? We're going to take the b value of 6, we're going to square it, divide it by 2, and then square it, right? And so for us, in this case, that would be 6 divided by 2 squared, and so that's going to give us 9, right? So that's important for us to know. Okay. So once we figure out that 9, we're going to plug it back into our equation inside the bracket here. So oftentimes we do something like this. Okay. And minus 9 plus 2 equals 0. Okay? I'm sorry if you can hear that noise in the background. There's something going on with construction. But once again, x squared plus 6x plus 9 minus 9, and then plus 2. If you are ever confused as to why we add 9 and subtract 9, once again, the reason is because you can alter equations by manipulating equations in certain ways, by adding 0 or multiplying by 1. Adding 9 and subtracting 9 is like adding 0, right? Because plus 9 minus 9 is 0. So we're not exactly changing what the equation was beforehand, and that's why we do it. So the next step is we're actually going to take out the minus 9 from the bracket. We're going to pull it out. But when we pull it out, we have to apply the 2. Because it's in the bracket and we have the 2 in front, when we pull it out, we have to apply the 2. So we are actually going to get x squared plus 6x plus 9. And then when we pull it out, we get plus 2 minus 18 equals 0. Okay? So we pull out the minus 9 by multiplying by the 2, and it comes out. We can collect those like terms. And as well, the whole point of why it's called completing the square is because we are making a perfect square trinomial inside the bracket, right? This is ax squared plus 2ab plus b squared. A squared plus 2ab plus b squared. That's essentially what we're making here. And so because we know that this is a special type of quadratic expression, we can immediately jump and say, oh, this portion is x plus 3 squared. And then we can collect like terms. Plus 2 minus 18 is minus 16. And we equate it equal to 0. Okay? And that's our final equation. If I ask you what the vertex is, the vertex is negative 3, negative 16. Oh, whoops, I forgot my 2 here. Don't be like me. Don't forget your 2. But there's your vertex. Now, some of you who are asking, like, how, Mr. Choi, I'm not, maybe I forget, you know, that this is a perfect square trinomial. Like, what if I forget? And I forget how to factor it. Simple answer, you take the middle one, you divide it by 2. Always going to give you that, especially in completing the square. Because we're factoring out the a, all you have to do is take the middle number, divide it by 2, and that's what the factor is going to be for your perfect square trinomial. Very quick and easy way of finding that out. Okay? So that's completing the square. Alright? That is completing the square. So, you can do this in a variety of different expressions. Yes, sometimes it's not going to be nice numbers. Yes, you get fractions. No, I'm not going to not give you fractions. You guys should be able to work with fractions. But it doesn't change how the rules work. Okay? So that's completing the square. Now let's go over factoring. And yes, Ni, thank you for pointing that out. Yeah, I forgot the 2 there, so thank you. With this being said here, now let's go into factored form. So how do we do factoring? Okay. Let's go over both cases. First case is when a equals 1, right? That's the first case. So if you have something simple, let's say x squared plus 5x plus, let's say 6, right? And that equals 0. When we're solving an expression or an equation like this and we're trying to factor it, okay? The key things that we're looking out for here is understanding what is b and what is c. So for us, b is positive 5 and c is positive 6. And so we ask ourselves the 2 questions. What 2 integers multiply to c and add to b? So that's the question you should be asking yourself, right? What are 2 integers that multiply to c but add to b, right? And so when we think of this, we think, well, don't even think about what it adds to. Think about what it multiplies to. So what numbers multiply to 6? 1 and 6, 2 and 3. And of course, the negative versions, negative 1, negative 6, negative 2, negative 3. And so then you can, once you figure out the factors of 6 that work, then you can figure out what adds. 1 plus 6 is not going to give you 5, so that's out, which means the only option here is 2 and 3. So we can say, oh, the numbers, the integers, are positive 2 and positive 3. And once you have that out, you can just write it into your bracket. X plus 2, x plus 3. And that was the basic idea when a equals 1, when the number in front of x squared is 1. Okay? So that was the basic idea of factoring. But then you went into some difficult ones, or more difficult ones, right? So let me give you a different one here. Okay? So this was our first case. Our second case is a is not 1. A does not equal 1. So for example, let's give 2x squared plus 7x plus 3. Okay? So 2x squared plus 7x plus 3. We need to be able to factor this. Now the issue here is we can't common factor because 2 does not divide into 7 and 3. So we need to factor this as a whole. So this time, we first identify all 3 numbers, a, b, and c. So a is 2, b is 7, c is 3. And we ask ourselves the same question. What 2 integers multiply 2, but this time it's a times c, and add to b. Okay? So if you ever see me write a dot in the middle like that, that means multiply. Later in mathematics, when you start going into and writing equations with a lot of x's, we never use the x symbol as multiply anymore because it gets too confusing. So oftentimes you may see a dot that means multiply. Okay? So once we have that as well, so a times c and adds to b, which means our last number that's important here, whoops, is a times c. So 2 times 3 is 6. So we're thinking and looking at these two numbers here. These are the important ones. What two numbers multiply to 6 but add to 7? And I think that's very obvious what the two numbers are. It's 1 and 6. Okay? So actually, let me write that here. 1 and 6. Now, I'm not sure how Miss A or Miss Lifshitz taught you. So I'm going to show you two ways of solving this question with factoring. The first way is through factoring by grouping. So once you figure out your two numbers, you can go back to the equation, and since we know 1 and 6 are the two numbers, you can separate 7x into 1 and 6. Once you have that, we can group these and factor them with common factoring. So we can take out an x from the first one, and from the second one we can take out a 3. And there we have matching brackets for grouping, which means our final equation, sorry, ignore that, would be this here. Okay? There's our first way. Okay? And I'm going to go over a second way, which might be a little different, but some of you might be like, why the hell hasn't anyone taught me about that? Okay? So that's our first method, factoring by grouping. And I think most teachers teach it this way. But let's kind of go through once again. So we know 2x squared plus 7x plus 3. And I'll write down all our numbers again. So we know our special numbers are 1 and 6. What you do now, okay? You are going to make a fraction of these numbers by dividing it by a. Okay? Bear with me here. This might be confusing at first, but watch. So for us, this turns into 1 over 2 and 6 over 2. Once you have that, you're going to simplify any fractions that can be simplified. So this one can be simplified, and so we're going to get the fractions 1 and 3 over 1. Okay? So now some of you may already realize something's interesting. Now what you do, these are the numbers that go in your brackets. This is the first bracket. This is the second bracket. And watch what I do. The first bracket, you take the bottom number and you write it first. Then you do the top number by keeping the signs. It's positive. Then the second number, bottom number goes first, top number goes second. And there you have your factor. And you're done. Very, very unique way of solving for your factors. So instead of doing factoring by grouping, you can do this method, which uses fractions, but it's basic simplification. Okay? So there's two ways of doing factoring, especially when a doesn't equal 1. So in this case, once again, I'll write it down here. Bottom, in other words, the denominator number is the one in front of x in the bracket. Let me zoom out so you can see it a little better. Okay. And there's one more thing that I want to go over before we end our review session and then vote for our time. Okay. So please copy this down. And once you have that copied down, we're going to write our separate notes here. So why do we have the three forms? What's the point of having standard form, factor form, and vertex form? Like, why do we need to know this, right? What's the point of this? Why do we have to have three different forms to solve one freaking equation? That's usually the question I get. And so, standard form. So what does it tell you? It shows you parabola opens up or down. Right? And we know that by just looking at the sign of the a coefficient. And second, it gives the y-intercept. In other words, y-intercept is equal to c. And that should make sense to you because for all y-intercepts, x is equal to 0. And if we plug in 0, we're left with c. So the y-intercept is c. So that's the first part about standard form. Factored form. Right, we have the a x minus r, x minus s form. So what's important about this? Also tells you if the parabola opens up or down. And second, the second thing it tells you is the x-intercepts. Okay? And how do you find the x-intercepts? You set each bracket equal to 0 and solve for x. Sorry, for x. We're going to be going over this in more detail in chapter 6, so don't worry if you're confused about, like, we never learned this. I'm just explaining what it's useful for so that when we start chapter 6 and I ask you, why do we do factor form? Why do we do vertex form? You know exactly why we do it. So it gives us the x-intercept. So factor form gives us that. And then our last one is our vertex form, which is the ax minus k squared plus h. This form here. It also tells us if the parabola opens up or down. And second, it tells us the vertex, right? And we know it as k comma h, right? The two values. And that's why it's our vertex form. So this is the important information you should know about the three expressions, and we talked about and reviewed how to get there. So when we start our class next week on 6.1 on Monday, hopefully this helps you kind of catch up and kind of review and remind yourselves over the last 2 weeks well, I think you guys didn't do too much work over the last 2 weeks, but hopefully this reminds you of the work you did beforehand. Okay? Fantastic. So, before you go, I'm going to be posting a link onto the live chat right now. And you watching right now. Right now there's 11 people watching. So what time do you want our class to be? And so I'll be giving you a poll right now. And you're going to see some options are not there. Okay? And the reason for that is because in case things go overtime and the grade 12s have already chosen 2 o'clock. Okay, so here is the poll. Please go on it right now and vote about what class you want it to be. You can choose multiple times. I'll take majority vote in the next minute. So in the chat you'll see it there. I'll also show it on screen in a second. Boom. Too big. Okay. So you have the link on screen and you have the link in the chat. Please start voting. We got 12 people in here. Vote, vote, vote. I have 6 votes in, which means we're still waiting on 5 people to vote. 5 people to vote. So please vote on what time you want our class to be. This is very, very, very important. Anyone else? Going once. We still have 2 people who have yet to vote. Speak now or forever hold your peace. Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Okay. The top 2 votes I see are 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. Okay? 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. are the votes that I see. Okay? For those, whoever voted 12:30, sadly, I cannot do 12:30 because you were the lowest amount of votes. And including my vote, because I haven't voted in, we have a tie between 3 p.m. and 11 a.m. Okay? So you have a tie between 3 p.m. and 11 a.m., which means I will make the final decision, and it will have to be 11 a.m. Okay? So I'm sorry, 3 p.m. people. I know you want to wake up later, but because of the class at 2 o'clock, I would like to have a break in between for myself, and that's me being honest. So we will do 11 a.m. as our class time. Okay? So 11 a.m. is our class time, so please keep that in mind. I'll make an announcement on Google Classroom. If you have any outstanding assignments on MathSpace and you haven't done it yet, and you're like, oh, the deadline's over, I will be extending all deadlines on MathSpace assignments until the end of next week. So if you haven't done the MathSpace assignments, please do them. I will be adding them into your Teach Assist marks as soon as possible. Okay? So, that being said, that is it. I'll see you on Monday at 11 a.m. If your friends did not come to this class, please tell them that they suck and they should have came to this class. And I'll see you on Monday. Peace out.